Yo, what's up, Shove Squad? Welcome back to a brand new video. And I thought it'd be cool if we looked at 10 of the best rogue decks over the past year in the Battle Styles on format. Of course, with rotation coming up, some of these rogue decks will no longer be legal. So I thought it'd be a cool idea to recap and look at some of the best rogue decks over the past year or so in our current meta. I'm pretty excited for this. If y'all are new here to the Shovel Squad, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. We're on the road at 20,000 subs. Make sure to check out all of our sponsors down below too. And let me know in the comments, what was your favorite rogue deck over the Battle Styles on format that performed well in a tournament? I'd love to hear down below. And without further ado, let's get into the list. All right, the first deck I wanted to highlight here was Diga Magnone. Now, this deck actually was pretty good in the online tourney scene way back at the beginning of the Scarlet and Violet format. This deck had a pretty good impact on the meta during the early days when Scarlet and Violet base set had first come out, and everybody was figuring out what was good. Well, Diga Magnone was pretty good. Of course, the idea of the deck was that you had a Rayquaza EX, which allowed you to actually easily search out the new Lightning-type Magnemite that was featured within Scarlet and Violet base set. So it allowed you to go Miraidon for Magnemite and Rotom, essentially giving you a free battle VIP pass with Miraidon. It was really cool. And then, of course, you get the Magnezone out. The deck played like over 20 energy. You would accelerate a ton of energy into play with Magnezone, and you could attack with Dialga's Star Cronus attack really quickly. With all the metal energy in the deck, we can use the supporter card Adamant, which allowed us to get any two cards out of our deck when we discarded two metal energies from our hand. This deck was just fantastic. It was a ton of fun to play, and one of my favorite decks from the Scarlet and Violet meta. And I really enjoyed playing it back when the deck first came out, because I think it won an online tournament. And I really wanted to highlight it here. Even though this deck is still technically going to be playable in the new format, we are going to be getting to the brand new Metang, which is basically going to replace Magnezone with Dialga. At number 9, I really wanted to highlight some Arc decks in today's video, and one of my favorite Arc decks, and one of the biggest surprises, was the Arceus Gyarados VMax deck that got second place at the Sacramento Regionals last year. This deck is crazy and caught everyone off guard. Nobody really expected a Gyarados VMax deck to get second place at the time, mainly because Miraidon was such a popular deck at the time of Sacramento, and everyone would have wrote off Gyarados VMax as just another VMax that kind of just doesn't do anything because it's weak to lightning. But, of course, it did end up getting second place at Sacramento regardless, taking down, or almost taking down, Colorless Lugia in the finals. What a crazy format we were in. I mean, that top 8 was crazy. And like I said, Gyarados was very unexpected because of how popular Miraidon was. Nobody expected a Gyarados deck to do this well, and it almost took down the tournament. The nice thing about Gyarados is it had two very good attacks. It had that Hyper Beam attack, which could remove an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, and then you had an attack that did a nice clean 240 damage. Gyarados also had 330 HP, making it really, really tanky. The deck also played Slacking and Radiant Greninja in the deck. Slacking's another really strong attacker that you can play within this deck, and you had the Radiant Greninja, which had concealed cards, which actually allowed you to draw some extra cards early on, and also synergized really nicely with Melanie, which this deck did play 2 copies of. I mean, looking back, this was just a wild deck to see at second place at the time, and it's awesome to see that Gyarados had another performance, because Gyarados used to be a good deck back when Jolteon and Memory Capsule did exist in the format, but ever since they left, nobody really ever touched Gyarados until, of course, the Sacramento Regionals. And at number 8, we got Bayet EX. Now, Bayet EX actually looks like it could be a legit archetype when rotation happens, but, of course, before rotation and Temporal Forces, nobody would have expected Bayet EX to ever be a good deck. Well, Mateus proved everyone wrong and piloted this really cool Bayet EX archetype and basically invented how to play Bayet EX, pairing it with Gardevoir EX, the Lost Origin Bayet, having Alakazam in the deck for some damage manipulation, and of course Mew EX, which is also something you can play with Gardevoir EX, basically taking advantage of all the different psychic attackers you can play. Bayet does have that item lock attack, which is very strong. Item locking the opponent is very good against decks like Charizard EX, and really good against decks like Shempao that really rely heavily on cards like Rare Candy. Item locking in general, though, is just really good because a lot of decks really do rely on items like Roaring Moon, Miraidon, and Mew VMax, all kinds of decks rely on item cards. So having the ability to just item lock your opponent is really, really good. And having the damage manipulation with Radiant Alakazam, having Gardevoir EX as a backup attacker and as a way to move energy into play was a really smart idea, giving you a draw engine with Kirlia. It's a really sick archetype. And like I said, Bayet EX does look like it is probably going to be playable in our next format, which I'm excited to try out Bayet one more time in our new meta. But I did want to highlight Bayet in this Battle Styles on format as one of the most interesting rogue decks we've seen get day 2 at multiple different regionals. I said I wasn't done with arc piles because I wanted to highlight another arc pile here at number 7, and that is Arceus Klefki, the keys to the kitchen. And the Lost Zone Kitchen did popularize this deck back at the Milwaukee Regionals last year, and this deck really caught everyone off guard because it was a very unique way to play Arceus V-Star. The idea was you used Klefki's ability, which allowed you to shut off your opponent's basic Pokemon's abilities when it was in the active spot. So with Klefki in the active, you were shutting off some very big cards from being able to do anything, like Radiant Greninja, Genesect V, Comfey, and Lumineon V were all shut off by Klefki. This basically allowed you to make your opponent unable to really do anything, and then in a couple of turns you could attack them with an Arceus V-Star while combining it with the power of Judge and Path to really slow your opponent down. The Aerodactyl V-Star was really good in the deck too, not only as a good fighting attacker in case you ran into Miraidon, but it also allowed you to have a better matchup into other Arc decks and made you have a great time into Lugia V-Star. If you had Klefki in the active against Lugia, you basically shut off Lumineon from working, which made it really hard for them to get 2 Archeops in the discard pile because they can't grab Burnett as easily. And then, of course, when you go Aerodactyl V-Star, you prevent Lugia V-Star's V-Star power from working, and if you have a Path in play, you can really slow your opponent down. The Aerodactyl V-Star was a great counter to Lugia, and this was a very cool counter box deck that really did pop up at Milwaukee. And the deck did have some decent results. I think the tournament later at Fresno and ended up getting top 8. So this was a very unique way to play Arceus. And unfortunately, we haven't really seen the Arceus deck ever come back, which I do feel like Klefki is a card that maybe could have seen some success in our meta right now due to the popularity of cards like Squawkabilly. But it is still cool to see that this deck did well. And Klefki having some kind of good performance was cool. And the fact it was combined with Arceus and Aerodactyl made it all cooler. Of course, we got to talk about one of the biggest stories from NEIC last year, and that was, of course, United Wings getting top 64. This was a very crazy thing at the time because United Wings was a perfect counter deck to the Gardevoir meta that had popped up at NEIC. Everybody was on Gardevoir for NEIC. It was the most hyped up deck for the entire tournament, and United Wings ended up getting top 64 piloted by Alex Szymanski. Now, this really only could have been done at this NEIC because obviously this deck had one big deal, and that was that it basically just got absolutely demolished by Lost Box. Now, Alex had to dodge a ton of Lost Zone decks in order to even get top 64 at NEIC, but it was still a really insane accomplishment because this deck basically just destroys Gardevoir because you have the Murkrows in the deck, which hits for Dark Weakness, and just being an attacking one-price deck was good. You even had the Wattrel, which was really good against Lugia V-Star. Of course, you had the Gallade in the deck, the Fighting Gallade, which was really good against Arceus V-Star, which was another popular card at NEIC last year. One of the craziest stories ever, and we haven't seen United Wings get a day 2 since NEIC, and I don't know if that will ever happen again due to where the meta is right now, especially now that we have cards like Iron Hands in the format. But at the time, this was a very cool thing to see get day 2 at NEIC, and to actually get a pretty respectable run too at top 64 is impressive. And yeah, I definitely wanted to highlight United Wings because it was definitely one of the big highlights of last year's Rogue decks. Next up is Gengar VMax. Now, this is a deck that actually had some decent results in the online tournament scene, but I did really want to highlight Gengar VMax in today's video as one of my favorite rogue decks from the last season. While it was only online tournaments where this card saw the success, it is still a really cool archetype regardless, and I'm still happy to see it do well. I really love the simplicity of this deck. Gengar doesn't need a whole lot to get going. It's got 2 attacks, one that can do 60 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon V in play, and then the other attack can do a nice clean 250 damage. If you combine that with Houndoom's ability to accelerate the single strike energy on a Gengar to make the Gengar do more damage, you had yourself a pretty strong deck. On top of that, you have Bibarel as a good draw engine, and you got to play Path to the Peak and Judge. One of my favorite things about this deck is how it got to abuse the Judge Path engine, being able to slow your opponent down while also basically knocking out anything they had in the active spot with Gengar made for a pretty deadly combo. It was really cool to see Gengar have some online tournament results because Gengar actually used to be a fairly popular deck back in the Fusion Strike and the Brilliant Stars meta. Heck, Gengar VMax even won the first ever regionals back in IRL play when COVID ended. So it's really cool to see the Gengar VMax deck here in an online tournament do well, and the fact that it still had some results was cool to see. If only I got day 2 at a regionals, now it would have been even cooler, but it's still cool to see Gengar do so well, and I am happy to see it because Gengar will be leaving us, but like I said, love it, and definitely wanted to put it in the list somewhere. All right, we got another Arc pile to talk about. Like I said, I love Arceus decks, and one of my favorite Arc decks that I saw was, of course, the Arceus Rayquaza VMax Armor Rouge deck. Now, this deck did get day 2 at one of the recent European regionals and actually got a pretty good respectable run at top 32. So definitely a really cool deck. And the fact that it gave Rayquaza VMax a good performance is what makes me happy. Rayquaza VMax was one of the most hyped up VMaX cards in Evolving Skies when it came out, but unfortunately the card ended up not doing as well and flopping and not really getting any good results. However, Arceus Rayquaza is finally the way to play Rayquaza VMaX. It wasn't with Flaffy. It turned out just play with Arc V-Star because you can put energy on it. Of course, Rayquaza's got the attack that can do 20 plus 80 more damage for each of either lightning or fire energy cards that you discard from Rayquaza. If you can put like 4 or 5 energy on it, you're knocking out anything in the active spot. You're playing fire energy, you can play Armor Rouge, which has the ability Fire Roth, which can move energy from your bench to your active. This was really good because you can move fire energy to your Rayquaza, accelerating the energy into play with the Magma Basin. But you also get some other really strong attackers like the Delphox V, which can do 120 damage to 2 Pokemon. And then you have the Heatran in the deck, which is a really strong attacker that you can actually use Magma Basin to put damage counters on. And then, of course, having Mew EX as an attacker too, all coming together with the power of Arceus V-Star. Arc Armor Rouge is actually a deck that could see play post-rotation, and while you can't play Rayquaza VMax anymore, it was still really cool to see this Rayquaza Arc deck do well, and having Rayquaza, or giving Rayquaza a top 32 before it rotates is definitely poetic, because again, everyone hyped up this card when it came out, only for it to kind of underperform and flop, but the fact that it ended up doing well at some point during its time in the spotlight was really cool to see, and I definitely wanted to highlight Rayquaza. Alright, now this one's a little bit more personal, but I wanted to highlight Gholdengo EX. Now, Gholdengo EX is a rogue deck, in my opinion, especially because I ended up getting top 32 at Knoxville with Gholdengo. So I have a bit of a personal attachment to this deck. But this deck is honestly really, really cool and definitely is a highlighted rogue deck, in my opinion. Gholdengo could be good in the new format when Path rotates. So definitely this deck might get even better. But at the time, definitely would be considered more of a rogue deck. Nobody really thinks of Gholdengo when they're building decks. But it's a really fun deck to play. It's got the ability to knock out Charizard EX super easily with that Make It Rain attack. Having Palkia V-Star as a backup attacker in the deck is really strong too. Having the Greninja, the Cologne, and the Cross Switcher combo was also really strong. This deck had a lot of really good plays that it can make, and definitely is a fun deck to play because you can spam Gholdengo's ability, which allows you to draw a card every time you use the ability. So you had your own draw engine with your own attacker. And this deck was really, really strong, and I really enjoyed playing it. It's one of the most fun decks I think I've ever played, to be honest. Just how fun it is to play spamming Pokestop, spamming Gholdengo's ability. And the fact that this deck could get better in the new format definitely is big, because I can't wait to try out Gholdengo even more next format. Next up at number 2 is Reggies. Reggies used to be my favorite deck during the Sword and Shield On format. Even during the Lugia format, when the deck was at its full power, the deck was still really fun to play. But unfortunately, rotation really did nerf the deck quite a bit. However, it still had some day 2 placements over the last year. And I did want to highlight it because the deck ended up actually kind of getting a bit of a revival. It did gain the new Luminous Energy, which was fantastic for the deck. While it's not as good as Aurora Energy used to be, it was a great upgrade to the deck regardless. There was also the addition of Super Rod, which essentially replaced Ordinary Rod, which is one of the reasons why Reggies kind of fell off, was because it did lose both Aurora Energy and Ordinary Rod. But when we gained Super Rod and Luminous Energy, we basically had that combo back in the format. The deck has gotten even better, though, with the addition of cards like Earthen Vessel, which is really good because the deck now has to rely more heavily on basic energy due to the fact that, you know, Luminous Energy doesn't let you put 2 on at a time, so you're not able to use it like Aurora Energy, so you have to lean more into the basic energies. But Reggies is just a really fun deck to play. Using Regigigas' ability when you get every single Reggies in play is a really cool concept, and this deck could be playable in the rotation format, though we do lose the Regidrago that does 240, and we actually lose the good Regieleki from Evolving Skies. So we'll have to see. This deck will end up seeing any play at all. I'm hopeful that somebody's going to try to get a day 2 with it, because I love me some Reggies, and as always, Reggies is a favorite deck of mine, and the fact that it saw a little bit of success during its run after rotation was really cool to see, and I did want to highlight Reggies in today's video. And finally, at the number 1 spot, the king of the rogue decks, in my opinion, during this format is Zorobox. Now, Zorobox is essentially a counterbox deck using all kinds of different attackers that can abuse reversal energy. Some of the big ones obviously include Skullvillain, which is a grass-type Pokemon, really good against Charizard and Roaring Moon, the Jolteon, which is really good against Pidgeot, the Mightyena, which is really, really good against Mew VMax and Gardevoir, and even having something like Flareon and Scizor in the deck for Shempao and Gholdengo, and of course having Cleaver, which also synergized nicely with Scyther, was really, really cool too. So this deck is one of my favorite rogue decks, and I'm actually really sad to see Zorobox rotate. I've seen some lists in Japan in rotation try to bring back a archetype similar to this, where instead of playing Zoroark, you just play all the attackers with the basic evolutions underneath, like Scovillain with the Caspikid, or Jolteon with Eevee, obviously Scyther, stuff like that. Definitely, it'll be cool to see if a counter box deck can pop up in our new format. But Zorobox was one of my favorite decks. Using Slowbro to checkmate your opponent was really, really cool. And after really with Paradox Rift, I think this deck did reach its full potential, because mainly we had a lot more attackers. We had the counter catcher, which was a great upgrade to the deck. The popularity of decks like Roaring Moon was very, very good for Zorobox. And it's sad to see Zorobox rotate, because it's a really cool deck that I feel like honestly could have been a good deck had it really ever had a bit of a breakthrough. Because unfortunately, when Sableye was just running amok in the format, this deck never really got to see much play, because Sableye gatekept it. And after we got Jirachi, we finally were able to maybe see Zorobox do good. And it's had some day twos since Paradox Rift, and it's really cool to see Zorobox, you know, do so well, because it's definitely a deck that I think could have had a good run if, you know, we ever had Jirachi a little bit earlier, because it had the fundamentals to be a good deck. But that'll be it for me on today's video here on the Shuffle Squad. What was your favorite rogue deck over the past format? I would love to hear down in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the rogue decks on this list. I mean, there are plenty of other rogue decks I definitely could have listed, but hey man, we can only fit 10 in this video. But there was a lot of them out there, and maybe next year we can do another video where we looked at the 10 decks from this format, the next format anyways. So we'll see. But I'm excited, man, for the new format, and I can't wait to see what new rogue decks pop up. And hope you all enjoyed the video here on the Shuffle Squad. Once again, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe down below and all that good stuff. Check out all our sponsors down below. That'll be for me on today's video.
Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.